I feel like I didn't explain this one very well last time, so I'm just going to quickly go over it again just so that you get that. You may have completely got it and you don't need this at all, but if you do, you can just skip the video. So basically, we're going to go in to the cache get, and we're going to basically mock the cache object and mock the database object and mock the configuration object, if you remember. So this is just the constructor that creates the cache object there. And then this is the method that we're going to call that does all the work. So I'm actually going to step into that this time. Last time I didn't step in, and I think that was the problem. I think that's why it wasn't very clear. Okay, so we've got a cache ID, which is cached sample service 1 all. And we're going to do a get to see if there is something there with cached sample service 1 all. Now remember, cache manager is a mocked object. See that if you highlight over there, you can see mock. It's a mocked object. So it's pretending to do this get. It's not really doing this get. So the response from this get is going to be that list of objects that we saw in the setup earlier. So if I press F10, the entity that comes back, it says that this was in the cache. So it says it already was in the cache. It comes back with the ID. So entity 1 is not null. So it returns the entity. So it never gets to this other code. So this unit test is checking that it never gets past here because the entity came back from the cache and it came back successfully. So here we go, and it's come back, the results come back. The result should be equivalent to list, and it is. So we F10, and then the cache manager, we want to check it. It called get. Get was called once, but it never called insert absolute times.never because it never got past that point, and it never called the database scan async method because it never got past that point, and it never got to call the expiration from seconds either because it never got past that point. So that's the way to check that it only got to a certain point in the code and it didn't call any of the other stuff to make sure that it's working correctly. Okay. Now this one is another success, so let's not do that one right now. Let's do it. Can we find one that's not a success? I've only got successes in here. That's useful. Let's see if we can find another useful unit test to do. Let's do a DAL test. Now remember, my DAL here is completely unimplemented, so this should be interesting. Let's do another caching one. Well, it's the same one. Let's do this one then. Okay. Oh, that's just data. That's not much use. Let's do the main. Okay. Controller. We'll do this one. This one. There we go. Okay, so this is a bit more complicated too. So we have a theory with 3 lines of options, and they have 3 parameters each going in. And let's look. So those 3 parameters going in are all bools, and they basically dictate whether or not we should get a throw exception on these different levels of the code. Okay, so this is just going to say if something is set up or if it's not set up, we should get an exception at different points in the controller. Okay, so let's see if we can get this to work and understand how this all works. Let's debug all. Oh, I should put an F9 there. There we go. Okay, so the first time through, we've got settings set to false, throw service set to true, so it should throw an error, throw an exception at service level, and it shouldn't at validator level. Okay, so it's at service level. So we're expecting an error from this level, okay, but not from this level. So so settings equals throw settings. So settings is going to be, a valid object. Now service is going to have null, I think, because it's false. Is that right? Hang on. Throw service. That's interesting. Throw service is true. Okay. If it's true, oh, if it's true, it'll be null. I get it. Okay, so service is null. So we're expecting an exception on service, and validator is a valid object. Okay, so we've got a null going in here. So now this is a function that we're going to go into that pretends to be the controller. Actually, this is not a function that pretends to be the controller. This is actually the controller. So it's going into the controller, and service is going to be null. So we're going to get an argument, a null exception here. So if I press F10, there we go. It says value cannot be null. If I press F10 again, it goes back, and it's actually restarted for the next inline data values because this has already succeeded. So really what I should do is put a stop point here for the next one so we actually know what comes back. So now we've got settings is false, service is false, but validator is true. So validator is the one we're expecting an error. So validator is going to be null. So the validator going in here is null. So let's go in, F11 in, and we'll go through here. Now validator is null, so we should get an exception, and we do. Press F10. So we come back here, and it's just succeeding because that's a successful unit test. Even though we got an exception, that's a successful unit test because that's what we were expecting. Because assert.throws, it's checking that we are actually getting the argument null exception, and if we are, then it succeeds at the unit test. It's a bit confusing sometimes that it's kind of a negative but a positive, but it works. So this time round, we've got throw settings is true, so we're expecting an error for that. So here we go through with a null for settings, and these have got valid objects. So let's have a look in there. What happens? F11. Right, now settings goes through to the base, so let's just have a look in the base. So settings is null in this point, and here is where we're going to get the exception now in the base controller. And value can't be null, so it comes back. And again, it's a successful unit test because all three of those actually succeeded. So we're successful. So there's no exceptions, there's no error coming up here or anything. So everything's successful. I hope that makes some sense.